Dennis, where are you? My water broke. Come home right away. What? That's impossible. I'm in Hawaii with Polly right now. I'm not anywhere near you, so why don't you call your parents? What? He should have known that today was my due date. So why on earth was Dennis on vacation in Hawaii with Polly? Though I was angry, there was no time to waste in this urgent situation. In a panic, I called my father. With the help of my father and his employee Rufus, I managed to safely give birth to a baby girl. Still, Dennis had planned a Hawaii trip with Polly on my due date and didn't even visit me in the hospital. Even after learning about his daughter's birth, he seemed to still be vacationing in Hawaii. Did Dennis really care more about Polly than his newborn daughter? I was completely fed up, so I devised a plan for revenge. Then, I asked my father, the president of a construction company, to help with this plan. As a result, Dennis would be in for quite a surprise when he returned from his Hawaii trip. I'm Allison, a 37-year-old housewife who got married a year ago. Before marriage, I worked at my father's construction company. Having remained single until my mid-30s and devoted myself to work, I had planned to eventually take over my father's company. However, a turning point came in my life. It happened when we were contracted to do renovation work at a hospital in the neighboring town. On my way back from that job, a man suddenly called out to me. "Excuse me, are you heading home? Would you like to have dinner together?" The person who approached me was a doctor working at that hospital. Since I had no particular plans, I couldn't find a reason to refuse, so I decided to go along. The doctor was 3 years older than me, and his name was Dennis. He said he had become interested in me after observing my work, noting how active and capable I seemed. Dennis, like me, was focused on his career and still single. Having had little experience with men, I began to wonder if this might be a romantic advance. I was certainly at an age where finding someone special wouldn't be unusual. However, I also had my goal of taking over my father's company. Since he was a doctor, I worried we might not be compatible with me being the heir to a construction company. Concerned about this, I decided to ask Dennis about his views on marriage. Do you want your future wife to have a career of her own? Dennis smiled at my nervous question and replied, "This might sound old-fashioned, but given my profession, I'm often away from home, so I'd like my wife to take care of the household. I'll make sure to provide well enough that she won't face any hardships." He clearly expressed his views, but it wasn't the answer I was hoping for. Perhaps I hadn't asked the question well. It seemed he assumed I wanted to be a housewife after marriage. We might not be compatible in terms of values. Feeling that there was no future in this relationship, I decided to give up on pursuing it. That day ended without any conclusion, and we simply exchanged contact information before heading home. However, as night fell, my thoughts were filled with Dennis. I realized I truly liked him. As I was thinking that I couldn't suppress these feelings, Dennis called. "I'm sorry, but after getting home and being alone, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Would you consider going out with me?" I was just thinking the same thing. I never imagined Dennis had been thinking about me too. And so, I began dating Dennis. The main concern was whether to take over my father's company. When I consulted my father, he replied, "Don't worry about the company. We have plenty of capable employees, so we'll manage somehow. Instead, I want you to focus on your own life and happiness." My father's words filled my heart with emotion. Then Dennis proposed, and we got married. Though it should have been the start of a happy married life, as Dennis had said from the beginning, he was away from home for work more often than I had expected. Having quit my job to become a housewife after marriage, I was determined to maintain a good home. However, I gradually began to feel lonely during the times I was alone. When Dennis was home, I couldn't bring myself to complain about feeling lonely, knowing how tired he was from work. However, my concerns didn't end there. Dennis's salary was deposited into our joint account. But as soon as payday came, Dennis would withdraw almost half of it. When I asked what it was for, Dennis replied with an annoyed expression. Medical work involves a lot of expenses for conferences and training. Plus, teamwork is important, so I can't refuse when colleagues invite me to meals. Just because the salary is high doesn't mean we get to keep it all as profit. Having never worked in healthcare, I found his explanation somewhat convincing, though confusing. Still, perhaps it was my role as a wife to manage well with what remained. Thinking I might upset him if I pressed too hard, I didn't ask any further questions. But was that a mistake? Once I showed leniency, things only escalated, and from the next month, Dennis started withdrawing even more money. The living expenses he initially left at about half gradually decreased. When it got down to just a quarter, no matter how much I tried to economize, it wasn't enough for living expenses. Whenever Dennis came home, I asked why he needed so much money, but he just said it was necessary expenses. However, wasn't this getting too extreme? I was reaching my limit of patience. I can't manage when you reduce our living expenses this much, even if you say it's necessary. Well, if it's not enough, why don't you get a job yourself? What was he saying now? I wanted to continue working, but Dennis was the one who asked me to quit. My anger was making me feel nauseous and queasy. Feeling at my limit, I rushed to the bathroom. Though I felt better after throwing everything up, I still felt a tightness in my chest from Dennis's voice behind me. Oh, now you're trying to gain sympathy by pretending to be sick. Sorry, but I'm not falling for that. That's not it. Just leave me alone. Saying that, I went into the rarely used guest room. I wasn't in the mood to sleep in the same room as Dennis tonight. So I decided to make the guest bed and sleep there. However, even after making the bed and lying down, my nausea wouldn't subside. Not only that, but I felt something stuck in my throat. Worried about this, I couldn't sleep all night. It might be some kind of internal illness. The next morning, still feeling unwell, I ignored Dennis as he left for work and headed to the hospital. I chose a hospital close to home, considering I might need ongoing treatment, rather than the one where Dennis worked. When I described my symptoms during the examination, I was surprisingly directed to the obstetrics department. With a certain suspicion in mind, I headed to the obstetrics department in the same hospital. The tests confirmed that I was 8 weeks pregnant. The doctor congratulated me, but honestly, I wasn't sure if I should be purely happy about it. Anyway, I should tell Dennis. Surely even Dennis would reconsider his spending when he learns about the baby. Thinking this, I sent him a message about the pregnancy. Though he read it in the afternoon, there was no reply. Wasn't he happy about having a child? I waited anxiously for Dennis to come home that night. However, Dennis didn't come home for a long time. He shouldn't have had any plans tonight. He finally returned after 1 a.m. As soon as Dennis saw my face, he asked something unexpected. "Oh, you're still up? Well, never mind that, but the baby, it's not from an affair, is it? Why would you ask such a thing? Are you saying there's some reason I shouldn't have this baby?" I was shocked by Dennis's unexpected reaction. If he didn't want children, why did he get married? When I asked for his reasons, Dennis began telling an unbelievable story. Apparently, Dennis's childhood friend had recently divorced. Since she had married against her parents' wishes, she couldn't return home and was struggling on her own. So Dennis said he was providing her with as much help as he could. I was dumbfounded by this story. Why do you have to help her? Her divorce is her own problem. It's not that simple. Her name is Polly, and when we were little, she always helped me when I was being bullied. So now I want to be there for her. So it was about repaying a childhood debt. While I could understand the sentiment, shouldn't he prioritize his own child now? Then something struck me. Wait a minute. The money you've been withdrawing saying it was necessary expenses, have you been giving it to this Polly person? Well, not all of it. Sure, I gave some to Polly, but it's not like I'm using it for anything bad, it's helping someone. Dennis's excuses really angered me. Even if he meant well, this was our important living expenses, so he should have consulted with me first. Perhaps because of pregnancy irritability, I blurted out something I shouldn't have. If Polly is so important to you, then get out. I want a divorce. Fine by me. I'm done with someone as unreasonable as you. I should have married Polly in the first place. Dennis stormed out after saying just that. I might have gone too far because I was angry. Besides, it would be better for the baby to have a father. The next morning, I tried to call him to apologize, but when he didn't answer, I left a message apologizing for saying too much. Still, he hadn't even read it. Should I give up on having this baby? That evening, I visited my father's company and told him everything that had happened yesterday. My father was furious. What is Dennis thinking? He's married, yet he's cutting living expenses to help a childhood friend, no matter who she is. It's outrageous. I know, I should have managed things better. Maybe I should give up on having this baby? As I asked this while stroking my belly, my father shook his head vigorously. No, this is a precious life. Don't worry about anything and just focus on delivering a healthy baby. I'll take care of everything else. My father's words brought tears to my eyes. Everyone at the company who was listening also offered their support. Originally, I had worked alongside them as colleagues who could discuss anything. Encouraged by these reliable friends, I made up my mind to have the baby. When I returned home, Dennis was waiting in front of the entrance, fidgeting nervously. What is it, Dennis? Weren't you leaving? Well, I was planning to at first, but you told your father about yesterday, didn't you? He just called and yelled at me. Said I need to come back right now or pay alimony and child support. He was scary, like a mafioso. I had no choice but to come back. I see. So that's how it is. Well, since he came back, I told Dennis about my decision to have the baby and the due date. However, Dennis, who I thought might have reformed, continued to be away from home frequently. Moreover, he kept withdrawing money without permission just like before. Even when I sarcastically commented that he must be giving it to Polly again, he just ignored me. Dennis had only come back to avoid paying the high fees. And with Dennis rarely returning home, I was approaching my due date. I thought about going to my parents' house for the delivery, but I didn't want to burden my father, so I decided to wait for Dennis at home. But even on the due date, he still hadn't come home. Being alone at home, I started feeling anxious. Then suddenly, I felt contractions, followed by a warm fluid flowing. My water had broken. I tried to call a taxi, but couldn't find the paper where I had written down the taxi company's number. I should have saved it in my phone. I didn't want to call an ambulance and disturb the neighbors, so I decided to call Dennis. He answered right away. "Dennis, where are you? My water broke, so come home right away." "What? That's impossible. I'm in Hawaii with Polly right now. I'm not anywhere near you, so why don't you call your parents?" "What?" He should have known that today was my due date. So why was he on vacation in Hawaii with Polly? But there was no time to be angry in this urgent situation. I quickly hung up and called my father. He said he would come right away. Since my father didn't have a driver's license, he came with one of his employees driving. "Allison, are you okay? Let's get to the hospital right away." Running towards me while calling out loudly was my father, along with his employee Rufus, who had been driving. Rufus was the company manager and a strong presence who always supported my father in times of need. With my arms around both my father and Rufus's shoulders, they helped me to the car seat. My father sat next to me, continuously rubbing my back and encouraging me until we reached the hospital. Thanks to them, I safely gave birth to a baby girl. They said it could have been dangerous if we had arrived any later. I was filled with gratitude for my father and Rufus. This precious life was saved thanks to these two. I couldn't help but love my daughter, who was crying with a bright red face. My father was overjoyed about having a grandchild, throwing his hands up in celebration. I asked my father to invite Rufus, who had been waiting outside the delivery room, to come in. I wanted to thank this lifesaver of my daughter as soon as possible. Rufus entered somewhat shyly. "Congratulations on your delivery. It's all thanks to you." "Thank you." Rufus smiled and shook his head slightly. Sensing the peaceful atmosphere, I smiled too. Maybe it was my imagination, but even my daughter, who had stopped crying by now, seemed to have an expression that looked like a smile. Seeing my daughter's peaceful face, I determined in my heart to make her happy no matter what. However, after that, I kept feeling more and more depressed. It was because I couldn't get in touch with Dennis since then. He knew I was in this hospital, and I had sent him the room number in a message. Thinking about Dennis, who wouldn't reply no matter how long I waited, made me feel down. Even after learning about his daughter's birth, he seemed to still be continuing his Hawaii vacation. Did Dennis really care more about Polly than his newborn daughter? I know being irritated isn't good for my daughter. Still, I couldn't control my feelings. I kept remembering what Dennis had said the last time we spoke on the phone. His words kept racing through my mind. Because I had loved Dennis, my blood was boiling. Finally losing my temper, I planned my revenge against Dennis. While I was carefully planning in my head, I was startled by a voice from behind. Allison, what a scary face you're making." Coming back to my senses, I found my father there. "Dad, how long have you been there?" "I just came in. I was going to call out to you, but you were looking down with such a frightening expression." "Is it about Dennis?" I quietly nodded to my father's question. Had I really been making such a scary face? I unconsciously looked in the mirror and tried to force a smile. That's right, since my father had come to visit, I should ask him for something. It was about the revenge plan I had just thought up for Dennis. "Dad, I have something to ask you. I'd like everyone at the company to help too." After bringing this up with my father, I explained the details of my plan. My father listened seriously with his arms crossed. When I finished speaking, he tilted his head and said, "Isn't that going a bit too far? You haven't even had a proper discussion with him since the baby was born." "Well, we're not busy at work right now, so it's fine, but..." "It's fine. There's no point in talking to Dennis. Besides, someone like him won't reflect on his actions unless we teach him a good lesson. So please." I begged desperately. Moved by my determination, my father finally agreed to help. I could already imagine Dennis's surprised face. A week had passed since the delivery. My postpartum recovery went well, and I was able to leave the hospital safely. After discharge, I decided to stay at my parents' house with my daughter. The plan I had asked my father for was swiftly executed by everyone at the company during my hospital stay. On my way to my parents' house after being discharged, I stopped by the location once to attach something to the "no trespassing" rope. When I called Dennis's workplace, the hospital, it turned out he had taken 2 weeks off. He had apparently submitted a leave request citing his wife's upcoming delivery as the reason, but he had probably been enjoying his Hawaii vacation the whole time. Calculating from the date he submitted his leave request at work, he should be coming today. As expected, I received a call from Dennis in the evening. When I answered, Dennis immediately started yelling. "Hey! Why is our house just an empty lot? What happened to my things? More importantly, where are you right now? I'll answer all your questions, no need to ask everything at once." I couldn't help but smile at Dennis's panic. Originally, the house we lived in was in my father's name and built by our company, so I had asked them to demolish it while Dennis was away. By the way, I had Dennis's belongings sent to his parents' house. When I called his parents to explain the situation, they were quite angry about Dennis's misdeeds. They wanted to come apologize right away, but I declined, saying it should remain between us until we could have a proper discussion. After I explained all this, Dennis just stammered nervously over the phone. He didn't seem to have noticed yet, so I asked, "By the way, did you see my letter attached to the rope around the empty lot? I covered it in plastic to protect it from rain." Dennis apparently hadn't noticed it, as I could hear him frantically searching. "Oh, here it is." After the sound of plastic and paper being torn, his shouts echoed in my ear again. "Why is there divorce papers in here? And you've already filled out your part. What have I done to deserve this? Oh my, weren't you on a Hawaii vacation with your childhood friend while I was going through a difficult delivery? That's grounds for divorce, isn't it? Affair? Where's your evidence? I just went to Hawaii with Polly because she wanted to go, nothing inappropriate happened. Don't make baseless accusations." Dennis was denying the affair, but we had solid evidence. Right after giving birth, when I told my father about Dennis and Polly's Hawaii trip and Rufus was listening, upon hearing that Polly had recently divorced, Rufus reacted. "Could that be Polly Lopez? That's my ex-wife who recently divorced." Come to think of it, I had heard that Rufus had married about a year ago but recently divorced. I had never seen Rufus's wife's face, but when I described Polly's characteristics that Dennis had mentioned to Rufus, it seemed there was no mistake. Then Rufus said, "I know which resort hotel Polly wanted to go to. I'll send some subordinates to investigate right away." Under Rufus's instructions, several young employees from the company went to the hotel where Dennis and Polly were staying. They stayed in the room next door without being noticed by the couple and managed to take photos with their smartphones of the two walking closely together, and even recorded the sounds of their intimate activities that could be heard through the walls. When I informed Dennis that all of this would serve as evidence, he hung up without saying another word. He probably knew where to go next. Shortly after, I went with Rufus to where Dennis had likely gone, the apartment where Rufus had lived with Polly before their divorce. Apparently, Rufus had divorced Polly because of her infidelity. When Rufus told her to leave, she showed no signs of moving out, so Rufus ended up being the one to leave. When we arrived, Dennis was indeed there, his car was in the parking lot. Rufus immediately headed to Polly's apartment, and I followed. When we rang the doorbell, Polly answered. She showed a surprised expression upon seeing Rufus's face. "Rufus, why are you here? And isn't that Dennis's wife? Why are you together?" "Polly, it seems you didn't even know where I worked when we were married. This person is the daughter of our company president." Polly's eyes widened even more in surprise at this. How can such a coincidence exist? To think Dennis's wife would be connected to Rufus's company. During their year of marriage, Polly had been indifferent to her husband's work and neglected their home, spending her time playing around with men. That's why she didn't know that Rufus worked at the company owned by Dennis's wife's family. However, this wasn't the time to discuss such things, so I called out to Dennis, who was presumably in the back. "Dennis, make sure you fill out those divorce papers and submit them. If it's too much trouble, you can just fill them out and give them to me, I'll submit them for you." Perhaps hearing my voice, Dennis emerged from the back, showing the divorce papers in his hand. "You mean these?" "Yes, those." Seeing that I was eager to proceed with the divorce quickly, Rufus interrupted. "No, wait a moment. Your husband had an affair with Polly. We have evidence. You should make him write a pledge to pay compensation before submitting the divorce papers." "Compensation, huh? Well, with my income, it shouldn't be too painful an amount," Dennis said nonchalantly. But Rufus seemed to have something in mind. After finishing with Dennis, Rufus turned to Polly. "And Polly, I requested compensation for your adultery, but you still haven't paid. I even let you keep the apartment, so what's your intention? Let's get that compensation paid soon." Polly became flustered at Rufus's intimidating manner. Seeing this, Dennis intervened to protect her. "You're acting like the mafia. Allison's father was the same, this is clearly intimidation. What's wrong with the people at this company? They're all scary." "What do you mean, like the mafia?" "Until recently, everyone called me the vice boss." The blood drained further from Dennis's face. Looking at me fearfully, he said, "So you mean your family's Sanchez family is?" "Yes, exactly what you're thinking. But now we're a legitimate business. Father is well respected by the community, and he does good work, which is why your parents trust him. That's why they didn't oppose our marriage." Polly apparently didn't know this either, as she turned pale. She looked like she thought she needed to pay the compensation quickly before something happened to her. "Hey, Rufus. I'll work and pay little by little, so could you wait?" "That's fine with me, but it's not just me you need to pay. You had an affair with her husband, so you need to pay compensation to Allison too." Polly responded with a small yes, while looking scared at Rufus's intimidating words. "Good, that's settled. People who do bad things need to make things right." "That's right. And while we're at it, I'll have Dennis write in the pledge that he won't ever see our daughter after the divorce." Like Polly earlier, Dennis just nodded slightly with a small yes. It's not like we were using our position to intimidate them, it's just in our nature to make sure everything is done properly. I left with Rufus, taking the pledge and divorce papers that Dennis had filled out. I needed to properly thank Rufus, as he had helped me with everything. Rufus, thank you so much for today. If you hadn't been there, I would have just had to accept whatever Dennis did to me. No, I should be thanking you. Thanks to you, I now have a way to get compensation from Polly. This has helped me completely move on from her. Rufus and I both felt incredibly refreshed. Although we each had former partners we should have cut ties with, things had felt unresolved. But now we could put the past behind us and move forward positively with our lives. The next day, when Dennis returned to work at the hospital after his 2-week leave, he was met with the hospital director's terrifying expression. It turned out that Rufus's subordinates had sent the photos of Dennis and Polly, along with the audio recording of their intimate moments, to the hospital's website contact form. It was probably Rufus's idea. I was impressed by Rufus's resourcefulness. After seeing evidence of Dennis's lies, the hospital director made his decision: immediate dismissal. It was a natural consequence, given that he had requested leave for his wife's delivery but instead enjoyed a vacation with his mistress. I know about this because when the divorce was finalized, Dennis's parents came to apologize in person. They told me everything about Dennis's current situation. They also paid the compensation that Dennis was supposed to pay in one lump sum, saying they would make Dennis pay them back later. Dennis's inappropriate behavior became well known among medical institutions in the area. Being a small rural area, rumors spread to neighboring towns and beyond. So it's no wonder he couldn't find new employment. In the end, Dennis ended up staying at Polly's place without finding work. However, Polly was working from early morning until late at night to pay compensation to both Rufus and me. Since Dennis was freeloading there, he was probably being treated poorly. Sure enough, I received a desperate phone call from Dennis. "Allison, I was wrong. Please, won't you hire me at your company? I'll endure it even if there are scary male employees who treat me roughly." My, what's this? You were so scared of our company before. According to Dennis, busy with her part-time jobs, Polly had been ordering him around. Even with cleaning, if there was even a speck of dust left, she would make him do it again. I'm shocked that Polly is such a frightening person. I knew she was strong since we were kids, but sometimes she even chases me with a kitchen knife. I don't have enough lives for this. I was surprised to hear about such a terrifying person. While I felt sympathy, helping him now would eventually mean letting him see our daughter. I don't want him to meet her now, at least not until she grows up and wants to meet her father of her own accord. So I hardened my heart and showed a cold attitude. "Sorry, but I can't help you. You made your own bed, so figure out how to get enough income to move out of Polly's place on your own." I hung up immediately after saying that, without waiting for Dennis's response. He has a medical license, so he should be able to manage somehow. However, a shocking incident occurred shortly after. While watching TV at home, I saw news that Dennis and Polly had been arrested. Apparently, Dennis, who had been struggling financially, found a part-time job online that promised high income. Polly had jumped at the opportunity and joined him. However, it turned out to be a malicious underground job. It was recruited through social media. They were supposed to be couriers, just carrying mobile phones to designated locations, but these phones contained information used in illegal transactions. Although Dennis and Polly denied the charges, claiming they didn't know, that doesn't excuse their crime. Dennis was naive about anything outside the medical field, so perhaps he fell for this suspicious job because I told him to find work on his own. Of course, blaming me wouldn't reduce his punishment. Anyway, I hope Dennis properly atones for his crimes. I started working at my father's company again right after the divorce. When I told everyone at the company about Dennis and Polly's incident and the events leading up to it during a work break, everyone was more surprised by Polly's violent treatment of Dennis than the incident itself. Even we wouldn't do anything that terrible. She's really scary. No wonder Rufus divorced her quickly. As everyone expressed their surprise about Polly, Rufus nodded repeatedly with his arms crossed. Well, maybe the truly bad people aren't from our world. Often, the scariest ones are those who act high and mighty without understanding anything. Polly is a typical example of that. Everyone burst into laughter along with Rufus, who was laughing as he said this. Indeed, everyone at our company is always cheerful, just like family. Since returning to work, I've been helping build up the company alongside Rufus, the manager. Although coworkers suggest I should get together with Rufus, he's strictly a work partner. I'm enjoying work now, so I'm not thinking about marriage again. Father named my daughter Darla. While father remains president formally, he's stepped back from work duties and is devoted to helping raise Darla. He's so involved that the employees call him the acumen hands-on dad. Father seems happy to be called that. Since Darla is also attached to my father, I can focus on work without worrying about childcare while father is healthy. And so, I throw myself into work again today.